Is my natural very at home here. Thank you guys for being part of this. So tonight I'll be talking about partnering with beavers to heal the planet, right? How can we work with these amazing animals to accomplish various ecological goals? But I think before we talk about partnering with beavers, let's just establish a few basic beaver facts about what these animals are and how they make a living. So what kind of animal is a beaver? Somebody just shouted out. It's a rodent, exactly. It's North America's largest rodent, typically 40 to 60 pounds as an adult beaver. What's the world's largest rodent, by the way? Yeah, okay, good. You guys are clearly a rodent savvy crowd. I appreciate that. So of course, beavers are semi-aquatic rodents, right? They've spent most of their lives, really all of their lives, in and around water. And they've got all kinds of fabulous adaptations.
Okay.
All the way from Odell Berry.
One of the thickest pelts in the animal kingdom, which of course was their downfall. I'll talk about that in a minute. Here's a beaver pelt that I bought off a trapper in Wyoming that you guys feel free to pass around. They've got these wonderful webbed duck-like hind feet, so they're very powerful, agile swimmers. How long can a beaver hold its breath, by the way? 15. Whoever is just answering all those questions correctly, you're a beaver ringer and you're disqualified. But yes, right, yeah. Thanks a lot, Megan. Appreciate it. They also have these wonderful goggle-like transparent eyelids called nictitating membranes, as well as a second set of lips, fur-lined lips like a valve. They can close behind their front teeth, so they can chew and drag branches underwater without drowning. I think that's my favorite beaver adaptation. And then what's a beaver's most recognizable feature? What makes a beaver and not a muskrat? Tail, exactly, right. And the tail is a really cool kind of multi-purpose appendage. It's a fat storage device. They actually put on fat for the winter in their tails. It's a rudder while they swim. It's a kickstand out on land. And it's an alarm system, right? Who's ever heard this smack of a beaver's tail hitting the water, which they do to warn other beavers about the presence of predators. You're that tail slap. You're the predator they're worried about, right? And then the other incredible beaver feature are their teeth.
Yeah, we'll see.
Beavers
So
have
far, this guy is
sharpening incisors. Here's a
people are not muted and they're cutting
here's
in.
a beaver
He's
skull that you guys feel free
a
to
good
pass
speaker
around.
person, not great on Zoom.
That's missing the top incisors. And beavers' teeth are orange. Why are beavers' teeth orange? Iron, right? Their teeth are chemically extracted, which comes in handy when you spend your whole life cutting down trees, right? So beavers eat the cambium of trees. That's the inner bark, kind of the sugary stuff that does the growing. What trees do beavers like? What's a preferred beaver tree? Willow. What else? Aspen. What else? Cottonwood. Yeah, those are the big three. They'll eat just about any deciduous tree, but those are their favorites. They also eat all kinds of green herbaceous stuff, right? Cattails, water lilies. I've seen them basically mow people's lawns. Do beavers eat fish? No, obviously not. You guys are you guys are far beyond that idea. Beavers, of course, totally herbivorous. So in addition to cutting down trees to eat the cambium, right, the inner bark, they're also using it as construction material. And there are two basic types of beaver structure. What would you call that? A lodge. Yeah. Where is that lodge, by the way? What lake? No, okay. This is Maroon Lake in the Maroon Dells. The lodge is the basic beaver housing unit, right? And in there you've got two to as many as 8 beavers. You've got the male and female, the mating pair. The kits, the newborn baby beavers, the 1-year-olds and the 2-year-olds. And then those 2-year-olds are the ones who disperse out looking for their own territory, like heading off to beaver college. So often, you see these freestanding island lodges, frequent, probably more often you see those kinds of bank attached lodges. And sometimes they're pretty inconspicuous. They just kind of burrow into the bank and top it off with some sticks as kind of a ventilation chamber. That's my dog Kit, who is named, of course, for a baby. I really have a one-track mind. I care about one thing, and it's beef. So, of course, in addition to the lodge, what's the other iconic beaver structure? What would you call that? Dam, right. So not all beavers build dams, right? Obviously, there are plenty of beavers, living in the Colorado River very happily. They're building these dams and kind of higher order tributaries. Why do beavers build dams? What's the point of this weird, unique, specialized behavior? Deep water, right, habitat. Why would you want deep water if you're a beaver? Safety, yeah, exactly. So a beaver out on land is, you know, as some biologists say, kind of a fat, slow, smelly package of meat, right? What would eat a beaver? What eats beavers? Bears, yeah, what else? Okay, they would eat the young ones. Yeah, wolves. Now we've got wolves, of course, to eat some beavers. That's exciting, not for the beavers. And then you know, mountain lions also love beavers, right? Any large carnivore is gonna devour a beaver. So by building that dam, they're just expanding the extent of their aquatic shelter, right? Instead of having to walk over land to a good-looking tree and, you know, risk getting eaten by a cougar along the way, they can swim to it instead and be relatively safe. So they're building the dam to enhance their own habitat. And, you know, these dams come in all kinds of wonderful shapes and sizes. I just love this dam. I just love this kind of perfect radial arc. This is up Clear Creek in the Arkansas Valley where I live. You can see they're using a lot of rock in their dams as well as sticks. I think people don't realize how much rock they're carrying around, which is kind of cool. Often you see these kinds of terraced dams, which basically act as like lock systems, essentially, you know, gentling the gradient of the stream. I just find that so beautiful. You know, and look, when they're left to their own devices, you know, they can build some pretty spectacular stuff. This is a dam in northern Minnesota that's about 600 feet long and 15 feet high or so, and is obviously the result of, you know, many beavers all adding their stick to the pile over the course of many generations. So, you know, obviously, in addition to being great builders, right, beavers are great hydrologists in a sense. I'm always impressed by their kind of hydrological savvy. You know, I feel like if you took an engineer from the Army Corps and put her on a river and said, okay, build a dam that, you know, minimizes labor and maximizes the impoundment, you know, she would put the dam exactly where the beavers do. So here's, you know, a 300-acre wetland created by a single strategically placed beaver dam at the little constriction point in a canyon. Pretty cool. Another thing that beavers do that we don't talk about enough, I think, is they're prolific diggers. They're great excavators, right? They dig these elaborate canal networks up into the forest. So again, they can swim up that canal, cut down that aspen tree, float it back to the pond, all without, you know, while minimizing their time out of water. And that's a really important way that they're spreading water across the landscape, right? Is with those canals. I'm gonna take a drink of beer, please. Excuse me. I've been talking a lot. So beavers, you know, they're doing all this stuff, right? They're building dams, they're creating ponds, they're digging canals. They're doing it all to enhance their own habitat. But in the process, they're creating habitat for lots of other creatures as well, right? Beavers are what's known as a keystone species. You know, we know that here in the American West, wetlands cover about 2% of land area and support about 80% of biodiversity, right? So any animal that's creating and expanding and maintaining wetlands is pretty darn important. That's, of course, exactly what beavers are doing, right? And it's really hard to name an animal that doesn't benefit from beavers at some point in its life cycle, but whose nests are these? That's a great blue heron rookery. Yeah, this is near Crested Butte. So you know, waterfowl, wading birds, songbirds. I bet a lot of you guys are birders, right? And where do you go birding? In a wetland, right? So beavers create wonderful bird habitat. They create fabulous habitat for other semi-aquatic mammals, you know, moose, muskrat, otter, mink, etc. What kind of critter is that? What kind of toad? Boreal toad, yeah. You know, so much of their range, boreal toads are basically obligate beaver pond breeders, right? Something like 90% of boreal toad breeding happens in beaver ponds. That's an animal that's almost entirely dependent on beavers for its survival, right? And here's a cool story. You know, this is the kind of anecdotal thing that you see when you hang out around beaver ponds a lot. So this is another beaver pond in Minnesota. Here's the old beaver dam. So in this case, the beavers left the area, the dam broke down, the pond drained, you get this lush kind of wet meadow that's really good habitat for, you know, moose and deer and other critters. But in this case, this giant beaver lodge was left high and dry after the pond drained, and a pack of wolves moved into that lodge and raised its pups in the lodge. That's beavers creating habitat for their direct predator, right? That's kind of ill-advised, right? But pretty cool. And again, you know, you really can't hang out around a beaver pond without seeing something weird and new and cool. What kind of bird is that? Sandhill crane, yeah. So a couple of years ago, I was in a beaver pond in Utah with a friend, we saw a sandhill crane walking along the crest of the dam. And we're like, wow, that's pretty cool. I've never seen a sandhill in a beaver pond before. So I took that picture, and then later I looked at the picture again and zoomed in on the crane's feet and saw that she had built a nest and laid a clutch of 2 eggs atop the crest of the beaver dam, right? That's pretty incredible. So again, that's not something you would see, you know, I've never seen a peer-reviewed paper about beavers and sandhill cranes, right? But, you know, you go to a beaver pond and you can't help but see some cool stuff. And then, you know, probably at least maybe from a management standpoint, in a lot of the American West, you know, the most important beaver wildlife connection is beavers and fish, right? Beavers and salmonids, trout, you know, here in Colorado especially. That's a juvenile steelhead, basically a rainbow trout that goes to the ocean. This is in Washington. And, you know, look, if you're a baby steelhead or a baby cutthroat trout, you know, you don't want to live in the free-flowing, fast-moving main stem river, right? You're just going to get blown downstream. You want to live in a deep pool or a side channel or an eddy or a meander, right? You want that complex, slow water refuge habitat that beavers create. And there are a million studies linking beavers to fish production, right? Beavers are just amazing, you know, fish hatchery creators. Of course, one objection that you hear, you know, from anglers and some fish biologists is, you know, wait a second, aren't we trying to take dams out of rivers, not put more dams into rivers right now? And, you know, to that, I guess what I would say is that, look, obviously a beaver dam is nothing like a human-built concrete dam, right? You know, and fish have all kinds of ways of getting past beaver dams. They can jump over them. They can wriggle through the structure. They can swim around them during high flow. You know, this is more sort of anecdote than evidence, but here's just a cool example. This is outside of Seattle. Here's the beaver dam. Here's the upstream pond. And here are the 2 freshly excavated coho salmon nests, or redds, right? So at least 2 fish had no problem getting past that beaver dam to spawn. And in fact, you know, the evolutionary connection between beavers and fish is so deep that it inspired my favorite bumper sticker, which is "Beavers taught salmon to jump." Right? That gets it kind of nicely. And you know, you probably can't read this text, but actually, you know, there've been a couple of cool studies about beavers and cutthroat trout specifically, and one really cool study published by Joe Wheaton, a great beaverologist, you know, basically found that cutthroat trout, because they co-evolved with beavers here in the American West, are actually better at getting past beaver dams than non-native brown trout, right? So those beaver dams kind of act as filters for the invasive species and let the native species, you know, pass at higher rates. It's just kind of cool to think about, right? Just that evolutionary connection between, you know, our endemic salmonid and beavers. So how many beavers live in North America today? How many beavers do we have on this continent? Somebody just throw a number out.
100,000.
100,000, a little higher.
500,000.
How many?
500,000.
500,000, a little higher than that. We've got something like 10 to 15 million beavers in North America. So they're not an endangered species, right? They're not going to go extinct anytime soon. They're doing okay. But then you start to wonder, how many beavers did we used to have? How many beavers were on this continent at the time of European arrival? How about guesses for that? 400 million. Yeah, that's kind of the upper bounds of the estimates. We don't really, right? These are all kind of ballpark figures. You know, nobody, of course, was counting beavers back in 1600. But the best guess is that we had as many as 400 million beavers on this continent. There have been studies showing that we had something like 200 million beaver ponds in North America, which, you know, some back of the envelope math suggests that we had maybe 230,000 square miles impounded by beavers, right? So that's land underwater thanks to beavers. And for reference, that's the size of Arizona and Nevada put together. So these are some pretty significant animals, right? And you know, I think one of the important things to note about beavers in human history is that, look, you know, this idea that beavers are keystone species and ecosystem engineers, right? This is not new to Western science. This is something that native people on this continent knew for many, many thousands of years. And so, in fact, some tribes like the Blackfeet in Montana had historical or sort of cultural prohibitions against killing beavers because they recognized that, hey, you know, in this arid Western climate, you know, these animals are really important in creating ecological oases for elk and bison and other critters that are, you know, important subsistence animals. So again, you know, this idea that you know, beavers are a keystone species, that's something that, you know, kind of white people are catching up to, but that native people knew for a really long time. So one of the things that I tried to do when I was working on Eager, my book about beavers, was just reconstruct what this fully beavered landscape looked like and how it functioned. Right? What was North America like when there were 400 million beavers here? So I read old trappers' journals and railroad survey reports and explorers' diaries. And everywhere you look, they're just incredible abundance. Explorers describing crossing what is today Indiana and not finding a dry place to camp for 100 miles because beavers had just ponded it all up. Lewis and Clark describe seeing beaver dams in every single river and stream and lake and pond that they encounter. Up into the Missouri Basin in Montana. They're describing seeing beaver dams in every tributary as far as the eye can see into the mountains. Right. And in fact, in some places, the Corps of Discovery actually had to walk along the ridge lines. They couldn't use those valley bottoms because they were so kind of ponded up. So that was in 1805 that Lewis and Clark saw beavers in every tributary as far as the eye can see. In 1843, just 38 years later, John James Audubon, of course, the naturalist and painter, traveled the exact same route. He was looking for beavers to paint. He was kind of off of birds at that point. He was on this beaver kick. And he was trying to find a beaver, and he couldn't find a single beaver in the entire Missouri River where they'd been ubiquitous just 38 years earlier. So what happened to beavers in just 4 decades? Where did they go, and what did they turn into? Cats, exactly, right. So I think that sometimes we hear the phrase beaver hat. Don't blame this guy. He's sometimes, yeah.
Can I just,
Oh yeah. Am I wandering out of the frame?
No.
Okay.
I'm just trying to do this so that people at home can see.
Yeah, sure.
See if that makes any difference.
That help?
A little.
Okay. Here, should I move it even a little more? No, going the wrong way. I don't know. I'm not gonna mess with it. Okay. So I think sometimes we hear the phrase beaver hat, right? And we think of like a big fluffy kind of Davy Crockett thing. But in fact, beaver hats are these sort of elegant Victorian style top hats that were all the rage back in Europe. Interestingly, beavers make such, I don't know where that pelt is, but whoever has that pelt can see on that pelt that beavers make good hats because they have 2 layers of fur. They have kind of the long, coarse outer guard hairs, and then they have a softer layer of fur underneath, which trappers call the beaver wool. And if you looked at those hairs under a microscope, you'd see that each hair, each under hair, has a little hook at the end. So when you felt it, all of those little hooks kind of lock together like Velcro, which is why it's such a kind of a durable, malleable, waterproof hat making material. So again, those beaver hats, they were all the rage, back in Europe, and the fur trade really begins. Thanks a lot. Begins in the early 1600s in New England, and very rapidly spreads west and south across the continent over the next few decades. And reaches the Rocky Mountains in the early 1800s, and by 1840 or so, you would have been very hard pressed to find a beaver in the state of Colorado or anywhere in the American West. And it's hard to overstate the kind of historic significance of the fur trade, right? Just the role of beavers in early American history. Practically every significant event in American history prior to the Civil War has some kind of beaver connection. The Revolutionary War, that was partly inspired by the British denying the colonists access to trapping grounds west of the Appalachian Mountains. The Louisiana Purchase, that was Jefferson, securing new trapping areas. Obviously, the smallpox that ravaged many native tribes, that was spread by beaver trappers and traders, right? So the story of American history is really the story of the fur trade, and all of its kind of grandeur and folly. And here's a coin. This is just sort of emblematic, I think, of how powerful beavers were in early economies. This is a coin that was minted by the Oregon Territory, which covered the entire Northwest from Wyoming to the Pacific Ocean. And the value of one beaver coin was fixed to the value of one beaver pelt. So the entire economy operated on the pelt standard. I think that's just, again, pretty mind-blowing. So of course, in addition to being this hugely significant historical event, right, the fur trade was also a profound ecological event. I mean, what happens when you trap out several 100 million beavers? Well, all of those beaver dams break down, and all of those ponds drain to the ocean, right? It's this enormous catastrophic form of habitat loss for boreal toads and cutthroat trout and moose and a million other species. Here's just one quick example. This is a coho salmon in the state of Washington. And there have been studies suggesting that coho salmon, juvenile coho salmon, lost 97% of their habitat as a result of beaver trapping, right? So, we sort of, I think that, when we think about early ecological catastrophes, we think about the deforestation of New England or the busting of the sod of the Midwest or, silver mining in Leadville. We don't think about fur trapping, but that was the original sin in so many ways. When you remove beavers from an ecosystem, you profoundly change it. Here's just, one example. This is a stream in Yellowstone National Park, right, where there's no mining, no deforestation, just the removal of beavers. And here what you can see is this kind of catastrophic erosion that happens, right? When you've got a healthy beaver-rich stream, all of those beaver dams are acting as speed bumps, right? They're slowing water down and spreading the water out onto the floodplain. When you lose all of those beaver-built speed bumps, there's nothing checking the velocity of water, and you get this kind of catastrophic erosion and incision in a stream that's trapped within its banks and can't spill onto the floodplain to create all of those great ponds and wetlands that we know are such important habitats. So again, this is a stream that was altered solely by the removal of beavers. I think that's again, pretty telling. And of course, there are hundreds of thousands of miles of stream that look like this around North America. And again, I think we see this kind of degradation and think, okay, that's probably due to logging or mining or some other impact. But again, in so many cases, it's just the removal of beavers just changes these landscapes. We're taking a sip of beer. On that happy note. So by 1900 or so, the beaver population in North America has reached its nadir. We've gone from several hundred million beavers to 100,000 or so, pretty much all up in Canada. You would have been very hard pressed to find a beaver in the American West. But fortunately, around 1900, we sort of start to wise up to realize that hey, these are some pretty important critters, right? And of course, Enos Mills, who's sort of the grandfather of Rocky Mountain National Park and a great naturalist and friend of John Muir. He wrote a wonderful book in 1913 called In Beaver World, where he basically pointed out that live beavers were more valuable than dead ones. And thanks to Enos and others, lots of states start to change their view of these animals and to attempt to bring them back. And states, including Colorado, begin to reintroduce beavers, often using stock from Yellowstone National Park, where a few beavers were hanging on, often using Canadian beavers, and slowly their populations start to recover. Of course, the most famous beaver reintroduction was in Idaho in 1948. I'm going to try to show you a video here briefly. Let's see if this works. Yeah, it's a little choppy, but so let's see. So in 1948, Idaho had these beavers. They wanted to move into what is today the Frank Church Wilderness area. And at first they tried moving the beavers on horseback. The horses didn't like that very much. Can't blame them. But it was the 1940s. It was sort of just post World War II, right? So Idaho, they had access to all of these airplanes and surplus parachutes. And so one of their biologists had the right idea of dropping beavers out of airplanes. You can go onto YouTube and search for Fur for the Future Idaho, and you can see the entire 12-minute unabridged version of this. But in the 1940s, the state of Idaho, they dropped 76 beavers out of airplanes. 75 of the beavers survived. One beaver, unfortunately, fell out of the crate and fell to his death. Very sad. But the next year, when they flew back over this area, they saw new ponds and wetlands and all the places where they dropped these animals. So this was actually a very successful beaver reintroduction at the time. That's a good. I'm actually not sure. That's a good question. So Nate, if you want to write a grant for aerial beaver relocations, I'll okay, awesome. I'll help you write that grant. So So, throughout the 20th century, right, beavers start to recover. They're being reintroduced. There are some trapping bans put into place, and their populations are increasing. They're returning to a lot of their old former habitat. There's only one problem, which is that in their absence, we've colonized the same habitat, right? It turns out that good beaver habitat and good human habitat is essentially one and the same. We both like low gradient stream corridors and broad fertile floodplains. That's where they build their dams, and that's where we put our roads and railroads and power lines and infrastructure. And I would argue that we're the nuisance species more than they are. But there's no question that when beavers and humans overlap, conflicts can ensue, right? And this is a set of railroad tracks in Massachusetts that I visited. This big multi-million-dollar railroad construction project that beavers had drowned in about 3 months, right? So they're pretty resourceful. Here's another cool example of beaver conflict. This is near Taos. This is a cabin that I stumbled upon. You can see beavers have totally flooded. I like this picture. I don't know how well you can see it, but in this instance, beavers, they start building their dam up here in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. They build up to the base of the cabin, then they incorporate the cabin in their dam, and then they keep going on the right side of the screen. Right? So, you wouldn't want to be that landowner, but you'd have to admire the ingenuity there. Right? Those are some pretty clever critters. Probably the most common source of beaver conflict is damming and road culverts, right? If you're a beaver, the roadbed is like the world's greatest dam, and the culvert is the leak in the dam, and beavers plug leaks, right? That's what they do. And this is a really kind of expensive, pain in the butt. The water rises, the road washes out, very, time-consuming to repair. So that's probably the most common source of beaver conflict. But they do get into more creative mischief. Here's a beaver that broke into a dollar store in Maryland and was browsing the plastic Christmas tree aisle when it was apprehended by the authorities. Right? So they do all kinds of weird stuff. And excuse me, and the way that we almost invariably handle these sorts of beaver conflicts, right, is by trapping out the offending beaver. Here in this country. So here's a good question. How many beavers do you think the federal government, wildlife services, kills every year in the United States? How many beavers are killed, using our tax dollars? Any guesses?
50,000.
About 25,000. And certainly private nuisance trappers are killing tens and likely hundreds of thousands more. We don't really know. And look, obviously, removing beavers makes a certain amount of sense, right? Beavers causing a problem. Get the beaver out of there. I understand it. But the issue when you're eliminating the beavers is sort of twofold. First, you're getting rid of all of that great pond and wetland habitat we know is so valuable. But also, all you're doing is opening a vacancy for the next family of beavers, right? As long as that culvert is still there beckoning to them, they're always going to come back, right? So you start to wonder, well, maybe there's a more ecologically sensible, humane way of dealing with these sorts of problems. What are our kind of non-lethal options for handling beavers? And certainly one option is relocation, right? Live trapping beavers in places that are causing problems and moving them off into to public lands. Usually to kind of the headwaters up in national forests. That's a beaver live trap, a Hancock trap. Here's Sandy and Chomper. A couple of beavers being relocated. And look, certainly, relocation has its place, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with Sherry Tippie, Colorado's leading, most famous beaver relocator, who's obviously propagated these animals in many, many watersheds by relocating nuisance beavers. So certainly that's a really important tool in our toolbox, right? But relocation is also uncertain. Those animals sometimes you put beavers out on the landscape in a new place and they get eaten by a cougar on their first night because they don't have their pond and lodge yet. I think in many instances we're better served learning to live with these animals, right? Solving these conflicts non-lethally rather than just getting the animals out of there. So how do we do that? How do we address beaver coexistence issues without killing the animals? So, look, in this country, lots and lots of beavers are killed because they cut down trees, right? They cut down, fruit trees or ornamental trees. And I just don't think that a beaver should ever be killed for cutting down a tree. I think that's just too easy a problem to solve. So here's a good example. This is in Salida, where I live. This is at Sands Lake. In this case, the town had these beautiful old cottonwoods. They wanted to protect from beavers, right? So they fenced off those cottonwoods. Okay, that's fine. And then they left unfenced the non-native Siberian elm trees, which beavers removed. So that's invasive vegetation management using a beaver as your agent. I think that's kind of the sort of cool thing you can do when you take a creative, non-lethal approach to beaver conflict. Another kind of tool in the box is sort of abrasive sand-based latex paint. Beavers don't like chewing through the kind of the sand in there. So this is a community, I think, in Tennessee, who painted all of their local trees. And they kind of did a nice job of it, right? So again, tree cutting, that's a problem we can solve in our sleep, right? No beaver should ever be killed for cutting down a tree. Right on.
Yeah.
Awesome. I didn't realize that. Cool. I'll have to check that out. So when the issue is flooding, that's a slightly more challenging problem to solve, but there too we've got options, right? And here's a contraption known as a beaver deceiver, which is essentially it's part of this whole class of devices known as flow devices. They all kind of operate using the same principles. You take a pipe, run it through the beaver dam or into the culvert, just to keep the water moving, right? You're just taking the water from the upstream side of the dam, moving to the downstream side of the dam, and ideally dropping that pond level to a place where both humans and beavers can tolerate. And then the cages, the fences are there to stop beavers from plugging up those pipe ends because they will do that. And here's just kind of a very low-tech version that some friends and I installed a few years ago at a neighbor's property. Basically the situation was there was a landowner who couldn't access her property, or at least part of her property, because of beaver flooding. So we put that pipe in, and you can see that in an hour or so we've already dropped the level of water on those trees by 6 inches. And this is not a good job. This is kind of a crappy low-tech version that lots of the beaver coexistence leaders would be ashamed of, but it just illustrates the principle, right? You're just moving water from the pond downstream, dropping level of the pond, ideally to a point where everybody can tolerate. And look, I mean, obviously, these sorts of non-lethal solutions, they're not appropriate for every single situation necessarily, right? I don't want to stand up here and say that no beaver should ever be trapped. But where they've been studied, they've been shown to be 85 to 95% effective, right? And there's no question that there are thousands of places all over this continent where we're currently killing beavers, or where we could be living with them instead, using a bit of creativity. And here's just one example. This is just outside of Breckenridge, or in Breckenridge, I think. This is like near the YMCA. Everybody knows where that is. And here's just a beautiful kind of culvert protection device. This lovely kind of trapezoidal fence that kind of keeps beavers from plugging up that road culvert, right? So again, this is happening now, right? We're doing this in the state of Colorado and elsewhere, and we need to do a whole lot more of it. Another really important beaver tool in our arsenal that's especially relevant for WRV and all of the wonderful volunteers and partners who are here tonight is beaver mimicry, right? Working with these animals, partnering with these animals to restore landscapes. If you can picture earlier that really eroded in size stream that I showed you, that stream that's kind of trapped within its banks, that's a really hard place for beavers to live, right? If you try to build a dam in a really eroded stream, that stream is like a fire hose just blowing the dam away. So that's where these sorts of beaver dam analogs can be really effective, right? Basically creating some structure in places that beavers might not be able to settle on their own. We're kind of creating like beaver starter kits or beaver starter kits. I can't say better than that. It's obviously a really kind of low-tech, cheap form of restoration that I'm sure many volunteers have worked on it at some point. The place where these beaver dam analogs are really pioneered was in the state of Oregon, in the Columbia Basin, at a place called Bridge Creek. there were some beavers in the system, but they weren't doing too well. So, researchers built 115 of these things, of these beaver dam analogs. The beavers themselves went gangbusters. They built 120 their own dams. They spread a bunch of water onto the floodplain. They filled in all of these old side channels that had gone dry. So they turned this kind of single thread channel into a really complex, big bowl of spaghetti, basically moving water all over the landscape. And what those researchers found is that thanks to all of those new hydrated beaver channels, steelhead survival, so juvenile salmonid survival, increased by 50%, right? So that's humans and beavers working together.
Build the beavers, the fake beaver dams, then beavers will come in and build their own dams.
Exactly, yeah. So Mark, thank you. I could have seeded that question to anticipate the next set of slides, right? So here's a really good illustration of this point. This is from this is Rough and Tumbling Creek, sort of on my side of the pass. And so here's kind of a classic. I don't know how well you can see that in the back, but here's a classic degraded western stream, a stream that looks healthy to us, but is in fact suffering from an absence of beavers. So here's this kind of single thread classic stream meandering across the floodplain. So this is what it looked like in 2021 without beavers and without beaver dam analogs. So in 2022, this a stream restoration firm, Ecometrics, and the Forest Service basically partnered to construct about 50 of these beaver dam analogs, right? These beaver mimicry structures. And here's where they were. You can see that okay, you go from this to this. That's pretty good, right? We're spreading some water out. We're creating some little ponds. That's not too bad. People playing beaver. And then the next year, the beavers showed up, right? So just keep this picture in your mind, and then check out that. That's pretty cool, right? So all of these red lines are beaver dams, and you can see just how much water is spread out on that floodplain and is soaking into the ground. So again, look, the beaver dam analogs themselves, they're wonderful. They're such important structures, and I'm so glad that so many of you are working on them. But I think it's also important to remember that the beavers themselves are the point in a lot of ways, right? The best thing we can do is create the conditions in which the animals themselves can thrive and take these sites over and maintain them in perpetuity, right? So we're just, like I talked to a lot of stream restoration practitioners, and they say that basically their best and highest calling is helping beavers, right? I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So why should we help beavers? Why are these animals so important? I've talked about their benefits for birds and moose and boreal toads and cutthroat trout. But what do they do for us? Not that that's the most important thing an animal can do, but it's helpful to be able to make that argument, right? That these animals provide some really cool ecosystem services and benefits. And look, here in Colorado, probably the most important thing that beavers do is they're fabulous drought mitigators, right? They're building thousands of little reservoirs up in the high country, keeping water on the landscape as we lose our snowpack, right? I've heard some hydrologists call beaver ponds our second snowpack, right? So as that snow melts, we need a way of keeping on the landscape, and that's exactly what beavers do. Where is this, by the way?
Rocky Mountain.
This is Independence Pass. So these are the headwaters of the Roaring Fork River, right? So you can see that here's the Roaring Fork, meandering along, and then it hits all of these beaver-built linear structures, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of gallons of water are being stored in that valley by beavers. And I think it's important to remember too that look, here's all the visible surface water you can see. What you don't see is the water being spread onto the floodplain and then soaking into the soil and recharging aquifers and rolling downhill underground. In fact, there have been some studies suggesting that beavers store 5 to 10 times as much water underground as they do in their ponds, right? So we're saturating that floodplain and just making sure there's still water in our rivers and streams come August, September, the hot, dry season. So they're great drought mitigators. Another really cool thing they do that's especially relevant, here in the Front Range is they're also great flood attenuators, right? So wait a second, I thought that beavers caused flooding. Well, actually, you get a big pulse of, snowmelt or rainwater racing downstream, and then it hits all of those beaver ponds, and it's spread out laterally over the floodplain. It's stored in the ground. It's captured in the pond itself. This is a beaver pond in Scotland, where Eurasian beavers have been reintroduced precisely for their flood attenuation benefits. And in fact, there have been studies in the UK showing that beavers capture about 30% of big rainfall events, or at least are capable of capturing 30% of those big rain events. So I think that's just kind of magical to contemplate, right? We've got these two polar opposite problems, you know, drought on one end, flood on the other end, both exacerbated by climate change, and beavers can help us tackle both by stabilizing the hydrograph, right? I think that's, again, kind of magical, right? Another awesome thing that beavers do, they're great irrigators, right? They're spreading water onto that floodplain, they're soaking water into the ground, they're growing plants, essentially, right? You know, they're taking these dry, brown, desiccated valleys and turning them green. You know, and there are, again, many studies showing this. But, you know, here's a kind of one of the ranchers who's you know, really benefited from this. This is a guy named James Rogers in Northeast Nevada. And you know, when I visited James, what he told me is that beavers were increasing grass production for his livestock by about tenfold. Again, by spreading water onto the ground, storing water in the soil, and just irrigating his pastures. So that, you know, now there's this wonderful kind of movement of pro-beaver ranchers all over the American West who have seen that you know, these animals are, again, incredible forage producers, and they create watering holes for livestock in many cases as well. So, you know, beavers, it's not just, they're not just for tree huggers, right? They're also, you know, plenty of farmers and ranchers who are excited about these critters too. Another fantastic thing that beavers do is that they're great pollution filterers, right? You get a stream racing along, it's carrying heavy metals, nitrates, phosphates, herbicides, pesticides, and then it hits that beaver dam, it slows down, it loses its kinetic energy, all of those suspended solids settle out, and they're entrained in many subsequent layers of sediment at the bottom of the pond, right? So again, lots of studies showing that beavers are removing enormous amounts of pollution from our watersheds, and you know, really dramatically improving water quality. And then, you know, kind of the final enormously important thing, or I don't say the final, but another enormously important thing beavers do is they're great firefighters, right? Obviously, water doesn't burn, and by spreading water out, and you know, they're creating these wonderful fire refugia and fire breaks on the landscape. And here's an illustration from Idaho. This is the Sharps fire in 2017. You can see that you know, all the uplands are just burnt to a crisp, and the last, you know, green, blue, wet, lush place, you know, in this area is that beaver created valley bottom. And you know, beavers are such effective firefighters that Emily Fairfax, a CSU researcher who studied this issue, she's proposed that the Forest Service change its mascot from Smokey Bear to Smokey Beaver. If there are any Forest Service officials with the power to make that change in the audience tonight, I challenge you to adopt Smokey Beaver. Or at least, you know, Smokey, the bear can have like a sidekick or something. We'll talk about it. So, you know, given all of these wonderful ecological benefits, both for humans and for other species, you have to ask yourself, why do we still kill so many beavers? Why haven't we more fully embraced beavers as this wonderful ecological solution? And I think that a lot of it comes down to our ecological amnesia, right? When we killed several hundred million beavers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, you know, we fundamentally changed landscapes in ways that we don't fully recognize. And I think that we, or at least a lot of us, you know, certainly including me when I started thinking about beavers, you know, we internalized this notion of a healthy stream being this free-flowing, fast-moving, single-thread channel with a cobble bottom. You know, this is like the kind of thing you see in an Orvis catalog or something. You know, when in reality, so many of our aquatic ecosystems looked more like this. You know, there was water all over the place. They were kind of sluggish. There were dead and dying trees everywhere. They smelled like decomposition. You know, the bottom was kind of mucky when you stepped in it, right? This is not the sort of thing you'd see, you know, in Field and Stream magazine. It's not Field and Wetland magazine. But, you know, of course, we know that these sorts of systems were in so many cases more rule than exception in many places. So if we're going to fully embrace beavers and restore them to our landscapes, we also have to reconfigure our historical imaginations and think differently, I think, about what our aquatic systems should look like. So to sum it all up, we have this fabulous animal that provides all of these wonderful services for humans and other species. It does it all for free. And best of all, it doesn't need permits. That's really nice too. So, as the mantra of the beaver believer goes, let's get out of the way and let the rodent do the work, right? I'm gonna get that tattooed on me in some day.
Yeah.
I'll just very briefly say that in addition to Eager, my book about beavers, I also have a new book out about road ecology, basically the field of science that looks at how roads, including the forest roads that you guys work on, shape nature and what we can do to reduce the ecological impacts of our infrastructure. I think you guys would really enjoy that one. But we're here to talk about beavers. So with that, I'll say happy to take some questions if we have time for them, Nathan, Morgan, and thank you guys all so much for being here. Take a picture of this great crowd. Yeah.
Is there anything the average person can do to help?
Oh man, well you can volunteer for WRV and help create some some beaver dam analogs. Look, I would say that one of the great things about beavers as an issue is that their fate is really determined locally in a lot of ways, right? That yes, the Forest Service and BLM have a role to play in beaver restoration, but in so many cases it is county commissions, town councils, local landowners who control the fate of these animals because they're the ones who control the fate of the road system, right? And again, as we talked about, more beavers are killed in road culverts than basically anywhere else. I set up last year. I set up a meeting with our road and bridge department in Chaffee County with a couple of local beaver advocates. And they basically said that for years there had been this informal bounty on beavers building dams and road culverts, and that if you were like a road crew, you got $50 a pelt or something like that for beavers that you removed. And so that's depressing, but it's also encouraging. And that look, there's so much that can be accomplished by just influencing the right people at a local level. So I would encourage you to talk to your county commission, your town council, whoever it is that that manages the road system, because that really is hugely determinative of beaver success. Yeah.
So if you put something like Breckenridge did around the culvert to prevent them from building, do they just build their dam somewhere else, or have you made that essentially a beaver dead zone for miles?
When you answer that, can you repeat the question? Just so
Oh, sure.
folks
Yeah.
online can hear.
Right. So the question is basically like when you put up one of those culvert fences or something like that, what do the beavers do with it essentially? Ideally they just go a little bit upstream, right? In many cases, the reason that those you often see these trapezoidal fences, and this is how I'll probably explain this badly, but basically the idea is that because they're trapezoidal, as the beavers move away from the culvert, their dam gets wider and wider, and so it's harder and harder for them to complete the dam. And ideally, that discourages them to just move a little ways upstream and build their dam elsewhere. And that's another important role for beaver dam analogs in some places too, is that you can build a BDA, beaver mimicry structure, 50 feet above a culvert, and basically direct their activity to that spot rather than the culvert. So that's kind of nice too. But ideally, you just want to protect that infrastructure so that humans don't have an excuse to kill them. That's the most important thing we can do. Yeah.
I was fascinated by the picture of the beavers hitting one of my least favorite invasives, which is Siberian elks.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the palatability of things like Russian olive or
Yeah, they do take Russian olive for sure. There's not much that they won't eat on the invasive front. What'd you say?
They like tamarins?
They like tamarisk too. Yeah, I mean, none of that stuff is their preference, right? In most cases that stuff is sort of co-occurring with willow, and given a choice between willow and tamarisk, they'll take the willow. But if the willow's not available, they'll take the tamarisk for sure. I mean, look, in some cases they also, they can also encourage invasive species spread too. There are lots of cases in the northwest of beavers, creating marshes that become, great Phragmites habitat, right? So, there's some feedback loops to watch out for, but they'll in the absence of willow and aspen and cottonwood, they'll take anything that's not a conifer.
I have a comment online
Yeah.
that maybe you can weigh in on. Somebody was saying a possible solution to beaver irrigation infrastructure conflicts, say that 3 times fast, could be to give farmers metered solar power pumps that could pull irrigation water from the ponds on their property.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I'm not aware of that having been done anywhere, but I like it. I mean, look, certainly that that irrigation infrastructure that's a big conflict. Irrigation dams are, they're perfect for beavers in a lot of ways, except for the fact that they get killed when they dam in them. I'm not. Yeah, if somebody could figure out the irrigation conflict, that would be a really big deal, because that is the thing that's kind of keeping them from being fully embraced, I think, by the agricultural community. So I like the solar pump idea. I'm not aware of that having been done, but another grant for nature, right? Yeah.
What started you down this path? Like, obviously you're a journalist prior. How did you get to the point where beavers were interested in you?
It just came to me in a dream one night. No, look, I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York, so I grew up around beavers in a lot of ways. I spent a lot of time hiking and camping and fishing, and they were always kind of there. And I had this sort of baseline appreciation for them. But then in I think it was 2014, I was living in Seattle at the time, working for High Country News as a journalist, looking for things to write about. And somebody sent me a flyer for a beaver workshop, and I had no idea what a beaver workshop, what that entailed, but it sounded like it could be a story. So I went to this beaver workshop, and it was just, one scientist after another getting up to, say all the stuff that we talked about tonight, beavers and wildfire mitigation, beavers and salmon habitat creation, beavers and water quality improvement. And it was just, incredibly eye-opening. It was this amazing revelation that, this, cool, fun, interesting rodent that I grew up with was not just a cool, fun, interesting rodent, but was, one of the primary movers and shakers on North American landscapes. So I read a few articles about beavers, and then that eventually became a book. And here I am a decade later, evangelizing, traveling preacher.
Go beaver.
Yeah.
What most needs changing in Colorado regulatory environment?
Man, that would be such a good question for Jackie. In a week or two. I mean, I'd be interested to hear Nate or Morgan talk about that, since you guys are actually in the trenches. I just totally punted on that incredibly difficult question. I kicked the can to somebody else very strategically. Yeah.
We are not in the
webinar next Tuesday, about the recent legislation, SB 270. That is the result of over a decade of work by the Health and Water Working Group to basically separate the water routes in restoration. It's negative groundwork or different type of restoration work that CPRW and WRB in our watersheds without having to justify the water rights.
Yeah, but I ask Jackie that question in a week. Yeah.
I've read how wetlands are really efficient at storing carbon and building up organic matter. So are there any studies on beaver dams or beavers and carbon sequestration?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep hunting great questions, but ask Ellen Wall that question in about 2 weeks, because Ellen has done that research. All of the great studies about beavers and carbon are set in Rocky Mountain National Park and have Ellen Wall as their first author. So ask Ellen that question. I'll just briefly say that I'm just going to say my idiot Cliff Note version of what Ellen's going to say. But beavers they're capturing all this organic matter, right? It's all settling out. all of those, you know, sticks and leaves and insect bodies and, you know, carboniferous crap. It's just, they're building this layer cake, you know, and and this is just a good example. This is also, just outside of Salida. This is, Pass Creek. And, you know, you can see this, just like this amazing layer cake they've built, right? And this is just, you know, this is decades and decades of organic matter storage by beavers. That, you know, has just kind of built up over time. So, you know, like you look at Ellen's, you know, like you look at Ellen's studies in Rocky Mountain, and, you know, you kind of, you know, in my book, I kind of tried to do this, you know, look, I'm a journalist, I can't do math, but I try to do some math. And, you know, and the carbon storage in beaver wetlands sort of compares, it's comparable to the carbon storage in old growth forest. You know, this sort of blue carbon is really incredible. And so certainly that's a big deal. I mean, you know, the other thing that Ellen's research showed is that, you know, when beavers leave the area and those ponds drain and all of that sediment is exposed to the atmosphere, you know, they can become a carbon source, right? That stuff breaks down, they're actually releasing methane. So to me, that's an argument for keeping beavers on the landscape. You know, we know that active beaver colonies and complexes are carbon sinks. You know, when beavers go away, those ponds can become carbon sources. So let's keep the beavers on the landscape, sequestering carbon and doing a million other things. But ask Ellen that question. Yeah.
If people are interested in science in the national park, the Park Service and Science Symposium is tomorrow and the next day at the Holiday Inn in Upton Park.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, you know, certainly. I mean, Rocky Mountain. You know, they've done some beaver mimicry too. They've got their beaver den analogs that I'm not sure how well this would work, but maybe there's somebody here who knows more about Rocky Mountain's efforts in that regard. Yeah, there's one back. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's ever like money for municipalities to purchase land for beavers, since they serve the purpose of cleaning and mitigating and holding water. Just in Fort Collins, we spend like $5.2 billion to build a reservoir so that our water can be clean.
Yeah, it's a fabulous idea. I'm not familiar with that having been done. I will say that there are people affiliated with the Beaver Institute, who want to essentially create, a beaver mitigation bank that would basically do that. That hey, if you conserve habitat for beavers, you're providing all of these wonderful services, and you should be compensated for that. So I would say that idea is kind of in the beaver zeitgeist, but has not been operationalized to my knowledge. Yeah.
Do you know any watersheds in Colorado or even the US that's like a success story? Like you could point to this, like this is how it should be done with beavers, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, so I would say that here in Colorado, look, I bet that that Morgan and Nate and the WRB folks have their own examples. I mean, I would say that closer to me, Trail Creek, which is the Gunnison River, one of the Gunnies headwaters. That was a huge Forest Service project where they put in, I want to say something like 180 beaver dam analogs. And just had incredible beaver uptake and response, and and really hydrated all of these wonderful old meadows. So the Trail Creek project, that's a good one here in Colorado. And then nationally, probably the most famous one is Bridge Creek, which is in Oregon in the John Day Basin. And that was, I showed a couple of slides from that, about how they, did all this restoration and saw an incredible fish response. And that, it was really that project, that Bridge Creek project in Oregon that I think, it brought beaver dam analogs into the mainstream in a lot of ways. So Trail Creek here in Colorado and Bridge Creek in Oregon. Those are two that I'd point to. But again, I'm sure there are all kinds of ones that you guys have worked on that are also inspiring.
Look to your local watershed. The Poudre River has a lot of projects with the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, City of Greeley, and Bay Thompson that also does work like this. I don't know who asked that question.
I was looking for like the perfect ideal. Like this is, I'm not saying Poudre's not perfect.
Yeah.
Like this is how it's.
I think what I would say is that look, the great thing about the Bridge Creek project in Oregon is that it was done well, but it was incredibly well studied, right? And there's this, there's 15 years of peer-reviewed research that's come out of that project that, we can point to and say, hey, here are the documented benefits to fish populations, wetland extent, water temperature, that's a big one too, et cetera. So, that's just a good project because it's just so well studied, that, there's a great volume of evidence. Okay, all of your beaver questions have been answered. We're all beaver experts now. Yeah, go ahead.
Not quite beaver related, but Red Eager, I read Crossings. Is there another book? Another interest?
I don't know. What do you think? Well, I'm taking suggestions. No, prairie dogs. Yeah, that's I feel like I'm sort of one rodent book is maybe enough for a while. No, I really want to. Yeah, ferrets. That's a good idea too. No, I really want to write a book about fish migration. That's I'm hoping that'll be the next one, and I'm trying to sell it right now. I'll be back in 2046 to talk about that. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more, and then we'll have another beer and call it good. Any other questions? Yeah, Nate.
Do you have more books for sale this evening?
Wow, Nate, what a good question. Thanks for asking me. Yeah, I do have some books. I've got some eager paperbacks if you're interested, for $20, and I've got some Crossings hardcovers, hot off the presses, and those are 30. Of course I'd be happy to sign them and personalize them and write a haiku for you. So with that, I'll say thank you so much. Thanks again to Nate, Sarah, Morgan, everybody who invited me here this evening. Thanks to you all for being here. Nate, thanks for the beer, man. Happy to come up and chat about beavers or roadkill or whatever you want to talk about. So I'll be there. Thanks, guys.
Sure, everybody, we have the venue here, thanks to the Alberta Company for that means that
Right, they want the roadkill to stab it. Yeah, exactly. Yours honored, of course, yeah.